Hi, George here, and today we'll be taking a deep dive into blur filters inside of Affinity Photo. And if you're looking for a complete training for Affinity Photo, I've got you covered with my complete video course for Affinity Photo. It covers versions 2 and the new 3 by Canva. You'll find a link for that at the top of the description. We're now moving up here to the filters menu. At the very top, you have a repeat filter. This just repeats the last filter that you did. Whatever it is, you'll see that up here. And let's look at our blur filters. There are quite a few of these. Average simply gives you an average of the colors in the image. It just blurs everything out to its most blurred setting, but it's an average of all your colors. I'm using the Control Z a lot to back out of these things. There we go. The Gaussian Blur is a very good, just basic overall blur tool. It doesn't put any preference on anything, no preferences on hard edges or colors or anything, and it's pretty good at removing noise, like noise in backgrounds. If you look at all the spots in here on this butterfly's wings, we can consider that as being noise. And notice how as I blur that out, that is blurring before the edges are. The edges are still blurring a little bit, but you're seeing more blur in here. So it's trying to retain the look of the image, but it does tend to affect smaller details more than larger details, which means it can be used to try to remove some noise in an image. Very good generalized blur, and it's one that I use most of the time for most things. Okay, filter blur, the diffuse glow. This one's interesting. You have several options in here: radius, intensity, threshold, and opacity. This makes a blur, but it blurs the light areas more than the dark areas. Increase your radius, you can see more of that blur happening in here. See, there it is. Kind of see this as I go back and forth. Let's increase the intensity. You see that? There you go. So the light areas are beginning to glow, and the dark areas are being left pretty much alone. Adjust our threshold in here. So it allows you to create kind of a nice glowing effect around things. If they have some light areas, you're just putting on a nice glow around the light parts of the image. Okay, filters and blur. The box blur is going to be blurring in a box or rectangular shape. You can really see this. Down here it's just a little blur. This is pretty good at also softening out details. You can consider that noise in your image. If I go real high up here, you can begin to see in here kind of the box pattern that's happening. So this is a box blur. And most of your blur in this will be way down here towards the lower side of this. Okay, back into filters and blur again. Motion blur actually smears the image across the rotational line here. So this is left to right, so it's smearing it across left to right. If I wanted to have this up and down, I would simply move this control up to straight up and down, and then I can then blur that straight up and down. Or at any angle I want in here, from 90 to 45 to 0. You see it's jumping here at 45-degree positions. There's our 45-degree blur right there. Okay, back to blur again. Radial blur is similar, except that this is going to be spinning the image. You can see there's that spin effect. Go clear to the top, get a total spin, just like that. You can use this for interesting tricks, like if you have a picture of a car and you want to give the appearance of the wheels rotating, you can use this, do one blur per wheel, and then give it a rotational spin. Okay, filters, blur. Zoom blur, again, similar. It's going to be doing a blur that zooms in. So you can see right there as I go back and forth, there's that zoom blur happening. Here's clear out. And just a little bit of that. And it can give you that nice kind of motion blur, but motion blur towards something in the foreground or away from something in the background. Okay, blur. The lens blur attempts to mimic blurring you might get from certain lenses. There's this number of blades here. This is for the aperture, and different lenses will have different numbers of blades to create the aperture in there. 5 is pretty common. You can adjust the curvature here, the blade, and blooming effects in there, and then simply bring your radius up. You can get some nice blurs this way, but this is mostly used to mimic a blur caused by a certain lens. We have a depth of field blur. Now this one's kind of fun. You can position this point here. If I bring up my radius, that gives me more blur. I'll go real high so you can really see that. Everything out here is full blur. Everything in here is the blurred change. And you can see that as I move this in and out right there. And you can increase vibrance if you want to. In here, control your vibrance. It's a lot more vibrant. Or your clarity in here, which is your sharpness. So interesting tool. And again, you can position this wherever you want on that. We have 2 modes on this. The elliptical mode, which is like this, kind of zooming into something. There's also a tilt shift mode. And again, same idea. You have your center point that you can move around. And you have blur on the top and the bottom. Now, you can't take this and even tilt it over like that if you need to. And this is useful if you want to have an area, let's say on a landscape, the middle area is in focus and things in the distance are out of focus and things close up are out of focus. It's kind of a depth of focus tool and can be used to give you that effect of something being a model where things are only focused in a thin, narrow band. And then just like that elliptical one, we can increase or decrease the range in here of that focus. And the radius controls how much in focus and out of focus you're getting. I'll get back over to filters again and blur. The maximum and a minimum blur, these are opposites of each other. Maximum blur is going to be blurring out the light parts of your image more than the dark parts. You can see it right there. It's spinning it kind of broken up here. It's also a blur tool that gives you more of these square shapes. It's kind of based on a box blur. But as you can see here, it's really putting emphasis on the light parts of your image and not the dark parts of the image. And then if we go back here to filters again and blur, minimum is the opposite. It again has kind of a boxy or blocky shape in there. You can see the squares right here pretty well. But as you can see here, it's mostly affecting the dark parts of the image and not the light parts of the image. Get back up here to filters again and blur. We have a bilateral blur. We'll clear the top up here. You can see how this is blurring out the light parts, again, of the image and not the dark parts of the image. If I increase my tolerance, you see it even better here. The light parts, which is mostly down below here, is really blurring out a lot, but the dark parts are really not blurring at all. The higher the tolerance, the more it's spreading that blur in, and the lower, the less it's spreading it in. Okay, back up to filters and blur. Medium blur is blurring out the mid-tones. There we go. It's kind of leaving the lightest lights and the darkest darks alone, and blurring towards that median value. And then there's also a custom blur where you can put numbers in here, and this will control blurring in a custom area. Let's say this is 1 pixel. These are the pixels around that pixel. Those are the pixels around that pixel. And you can create some kind of a custom blur in here by putting in just some numbers on this. Let's do that. Maybe I'll go here to 5 on the edges. I'm getting kind of a left and right blur on this. Top and bottom I'm leaving alone, but I'm blurring left and right a little bit, getting a little bit of that motion blur happening in there. If you want to play around with this, kind of create your own custom blur, you can do that here. I've never really found any use for this, but there you go. It's something that's kind of fun to play with sometimes. Okay, so that's a quick look through all of our blur filters in here. And again, the ones I use the most, normally I'll use the Gaussian blur, and I'll occasionally use the motion blur, radial, or zoom blur for some special effects work. Just a reminder, I do have a complete video training course for Affinity Photo. It covers versions 2 and 3. And you find the link for that at the top of the description. And you can watch module 1 of that training for free. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any videos in the future. And I'll see you next time.